Tax issues here. A few tax issues there, Mr. Paul, but hopefully we can move through this quickly and try to get some resolution.
Absolutely.
Right,
Agent Shrew, Agent Martin, thank you guys for meeting with us today. We're representatives from KPMG.
Great.
And yes, and we're here with our client, Chris Paul. We understand that the IRS has taken a position on Mr. Paul's tax return that will increase his liability, but we're just here to present our position. We know that you guys have a lot of clients, so we're going to move through this pretty quickly and be efficient.
I'll go as fast as you want to.
All right, the first issue we want to talk about was the bond interest,
Yep.
specifically the interest on Samoa.
Yep.
We think that it is tax exempt under Internal Revenue Code Section 103A. Samoa is a possession of the United States, and yes, interest received from a state, Samoa, would be tax exempt.
Yeah, that does make sense. Probably just missed that. That's allowable.
However, we do agree with your stance on the U.S. Treasury bonds. Our client, Mr. Paul, just made an error in that the interest on those bonds are taxable.
I'm going to do this for 18 years from now. Right?
Exactly. So with that, we're just going to move on to the second issue, and we'll come back to the bonds on Wake Forest Medical.
I'm going to talk to you about the BMW that Mr. Paul received
Yeah.
as a reward for making the
I
team.
say one thing. I'm a big fan. I'm a big clipper. I set with Billy Crystal every now and then. It's kind of unusual, but man, I grew up on a beet farm. I got
I see that.
Alright, so we just want to show you that on March 30th, 2011, he did receive this award, or the BMW. And then,
nice car.
yeah, he wasn't using it that often, and, he was trying to give back, somehow, not really in regard to the BMW, but then, he was advised that there's Wake Forest has a radio station that has donate the car for charity, and so since he wasn't using it, he decided to donate it. And so on November,
$110,000 of income though, right? You need to report that, right?
yeah, and we'll get to that. We were going to get to the fact that he just honestly did not mean to not report it. He had heard that if you give it to charity, which we're going to get to, and he did give it to charity here on November 10th, that you didn't have to include it in your income. But according to Section 74 of the code, you have to include everything. Except there is some exceptions if you give it to charity, and I think that's what he looked at and made an error. But according to the regulation 1.74, this only qualifies if you give it within 45 days. And so since it was after 48 days, so yeah, he did not mean to do that. And here's just more to show that he did own it. And down there is the website for the Wake Forest radio station, that they are a charity. So we will say under Section 170, we believe this is a charity, and it does qualify as a contribution, and he should receive a deduction for this. So he should include it in his gross income, and that was just a minor error on his behalf. It was honest mistake, because it wasn't completely wrong, and you do sometimes get it excluded from your income if you do give it to charity. So we're just going to argue that we want it in his gross income, but then he also should receive a deduction as a.
How much of a deduction?
We did just basically try to do the fair market value of it, and here's kind of like a high-low of kind of the range of where we think he should get a deduction, since it was only a few months or 6 months or so after.
What did employer do?
They ended up they took it in and they ended up selling it off.
You know what they sold it for?
I'm not really sure, but we can get back to you about that exact number, but we're not sure exactly.
Because if they sold it, that's all that really matters, right? It doesn't really matter about the fair market value if they sold it. It's just the gross proceeds of what they sold it for.
Okay. Well, then we can get back to it, but we just want to make sure we agree that he still will receive a deduction for this.
But that seems, that does seem right. Clearly give it to a charitable organization, and he can provide some documentation that they actually sold it, and the appropriate documentation will come with that, and we'll give a deduction.
Absolutely. We'll get in contact with them and get that documentation.
Perfect. We'll get that to you after the meeting. And then Abigail's going to go on about the painting.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the
A big
painting.
$500,000.
Yeah, I understand. Because you can see this receipt from October 2009 showing that he did own this money. Yeah, and this is a clone letter from the president, and showing that he did donate to the forest. And this photo also show that this painting is right now hanging on the wall for the chapel.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
So they're putting it there for everyone to see and enjoy as part of the academic experience here. Huh?
And according to section.
Yeah, I love to give back to my alma mater.
Yeah, very kind of you.
Yeah. According to section 170C24, any individual contribution, non-cash contribution to education organization should be deducted, right? And Wake Forest apparently is an education organization, so we think Mr. Paul is entitled to this one. And then we can move
Seems
to
like he
the
gave it away, and it seems like it's not for profit, but how do you sustain the
substantiation
amount?
requirements.
Sure.
Yeah.
There wasn't anything in the tax returns, so I had
Yeah,
nothing
we
to go
know.
off of,
Absolutely.
We
right?
know that. We know that because he didn't understand the difference between cash and property donation. So maybe he made this mistake in the beginning. And this is a three number we think may be relevant. The first number is the 325 purchase price. And the second is the offer from the museum, showing that they're going to evaluate this at $500,000. And the third one is the appraisal made by Wake Forest on 12.
Yeah, appraisal.
Yeah. And you can
That's pretty important.
yeah, you can see, but actually we think this number will be the most reasonable one because first of all, it's made on October, it's made on April for 2011, which is the closest date to the contribution date. So they're more relevant. Secondly, it's the museum, which is very professional expert in the industry. So we trust in their evaluation. Thirdly, it's a business negotiation. Therefore, the offer will be lower than the actual value. So, and you can see as time goes by, this property actually appreciates. So we believe the actual value on the contribution day will be higher than $500,000. But we know we didn't really fulfill the substantiation requirement. So we would
Kind
like
of
to.
important, right?
Yeah, we understand that. But since I mean the code's purpose is to prevent people from artificially inflating the number, which is not in this case for Mr. Paul. We can see the number is reasonable, so we want to take this conservative stance for deducting $500 million. Yeah.
Since the appraisal is dated June 15th at 12, that's very important, obviously. Without that, before he filed his tax return, we couldn't allow anything by law. And there's one other pretty big requirement. What's that form that has to be filed? I always forget.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I know this form, but we see these three documents actually contain all the information we need to fill in that form. If you need that form, we can do it within 2 hours and get it back to you. Yeah.
Can I ask Mr. Paul one question? So, there is a requirement in the law to file that form with the return. I do have the ability to grant some leeway with respect to that form not being filed, but I have to understand why.
Well, with the portrait, I gave that to the university when the numbers were put up originally. I did that on an earnest attempt of what was given to me by the appraiser, so I went with that figure. It was just honestly a mistake on my behalf, not doing my due diligence.
Yeah, it's a close one, but yeah, I wish I think if you can, obviously we can't grant anything without the form.
Well, we'll
If
definitely,
you guys can provide that.
absolutely,
Yeah.
agent two and agent one.
And I think we can allow the $500,000 reduction
Thank
assuming we get the right.
Yeah.
We can have that back.
I must be feeling really generous today.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I know, just in the interest of time, we have a few more things we
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
discuss.
Great.
Lily?
All ears.
So I'm going to talk about the $200,000 bad debt. That
Of his cousin, right?
yes, yeah. So we believe
I
that.
wish my cousin would give me $2,000,
Well,
right?
I don't think Mr. Paul specifically gave the money to his cousin. He saw the star potential in his cousin, and that is why he wanted to loan the money to him so he can become a potential NBA star.
Okay.
So Mr. Paul has done this previously for a few years with two other players,
Okay.
Derek and yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so under Reg 166, it does qualify for business bad debt if it is
Was
for,
the loan documented in any way,
Oh,
or?
yes.
I mean,
yeah. Under this contract, we
Oh.
qualify as a bona fide debt because it
Well, that is
does
helpful.
offer a fixed amount of some money to be paid at the end of the
It's
6th
helpful.
year.
I just assumed they gave him the money.
Yes, I understand, like, it doesn't really say that on there.
I understand. So if they got a loan, so what makes you think it's worthless?
Oh, in this email that between Jason and Mr. Paul, here it says in in the year 2011, Jason was unable to pay back the amount of loan and is currently filing for bankruptcy. So in 2011, he has already filed for a bankruptcy and hired an attorney. And here's the documentation from
Did you
the.
try to collect this, and did you just not go after it because
No, it was a sound investment in my cousin. I really thought he had great skills and great potential to be a great player in the league. So I made it as an honest investment. I didn't realize he's going to default and exit the
Did
league
you try to
completely.
collect?
Yeah.
I have.
Does he have no sources of income?
Does the cousin? No,
I think that's why he's filing for bankruptcy. I believe it says there that the agent has been contacting him several times.
Oh,
But-
so there has been an attempt.
Yeah, they've
Yes.
contacted him several times,
That's
but,
important.
and then he sent an email to him just saying, can you tell your agent to lay off? Basically, he can
And just
pay him.
in the interest of time, if you guys just want to think about that some more, we think we have enough evidence and documentation. If you guys want to review that afterwards, but we have one more issue we wanted to touch on, just in the interest of time.
All right, I'm Brian. I'm going to touch on the moving expenses. I know Mr. Paul did not provide documentation for his,
Not big on documentation, like Mr. Paul.
for that was also on his mistake, but then these are the expenses that incurred with
Big numbers.
yeah, they are big numbers. He had a lot of property to move from New Orleans to LA. So you see those numbers. And first I'll start talking about the moving expenses, loading, transportation, and household goods. According to section 217, those are deductible if a taxpayer is moving from a place of old residence or old employment to a place of new employment, which Mr. Paul was. So we believe that the entire amount of $85,600 is deductible. And then moving on to the lodging, also section 217, section paragraph B also states that lodging expenses, including transportation, are deductible except meals. And we also see that he has additional 24-hour security services, which I think were not necessary expenses, so we will not be vouching for the deduction on that $4,600, and also the room service, since we probably included meals. So we're taking the $3,800.